This is the moment most people get it completely wrong about aging. Not because they lack willpower, not because they don't care about their health, but because they're being pushed toward expensive solutions while something far simpler and far more powerful has been sitting quietly in their kitchen all along. Right now, I want you to stop for a second and think about this. What if the real driver behind your joint pain, your fatigue, your memory slips, and even your slow recovery isn't some mysterious disease, but a hidden internal fire that's been burning for years without you even noticing it? And what if that fire can actually be cooled down with foods that cost less than a cup of coffee? Today, I'm going to show you exactly that, based on research from some of the most respected medical institutions in the world, including Harvard Medical School, Mayo Clinic, and leading university studies. We are going to walk through 5 powerful anti inflammatory foods ranked from number 5 all the way to number 1. And I need to be clear with you from the beginning, number 1 is not what most people expect. In fact, most people are eating it completely wrong, throwing away the most powerful part without realizing it. Before we get into it, I want you to think about your own situation. Whether it's joint pain, low energy, brain fog, heart concerns, or something else that's affecting your daily life. Drop it in your mind for a moment because everything we're about to discuss connects directly to it. What science now understands is that chronic inflammation is not just a small side effect of aging. According to major clinical research, including work referenced by institutions like the Mayo Clinic, it is deeply linked to conditions such as Alzheimer's disease, heart failure, type 2 diabetes, and accelerated muscle loss. This slow, silent process is often called inflammaging, where the body's defense system stops switching off properly and keeps sending inflammatory signals even when there is no real threat. Over time, this damages tissues, weakens muscles, affects brain function, and increases disease risk across the board. The uncomfortable truth is that many people over 60 are unknowingly feeding this process every single day through their diet and lifestyle while believing they are doing everything right. Now, I'm going to take you through 5 specific foods that directly target this process, and we'll begin with number 5. This one surprises almost everyone I meet in clinical practice because it seems too simple to matter, yet the research tells a very different story. Number 5 is extra virgin olive oil. And I know what you're thinking. You've heard this before. But what most people don't realize is how precise the dosage and quality actually need to be for it to have a measurable biological effect. A study involving older adults published in neurological research journals, tracking participants between 55 and 80 years old, found that daily intake of about 1.5 tablespoons of high quality extra virgin olive oil significantly improved blood flow in the brain's small vessels by over 30%. Even more importantly, it reduced interleukin 6, a key inflammatory marker, by nearly 30% as well. That matters because once you cross into later adulthood, your body's natural ability to regulate inflammation starts to weaken. The internal balance that once allowed inflammation to rise and fall smoothly begins to stay slightly stuck on, creating a constant low-grade stress inside the body. The key compound responsible for these effects is something called oleocanthal, a natural polyphenol found in fresh, high-quality olive oil. At a molecular level, it behaves in a way that is surprisingly similar to ibuprofen, targeting the same inflammatory pathways in the body. But unlike pharmaceutical options, it does not carry the same risk profile for long-term use in older adults. Researchers have even measured its activity and found that a normal daily intake of extra virgin olive oil can provide a mild but consistent anti-inflammatory effect without damaging the stomach lining or stressing kidney function. However, this only works if the oil is handled correctly. One of the biggest mistakes people make is heating olive oil to high temperatures. Once it reaches its smoke point, these delicate compounds begin to break down, and the very properties that make it beneficial are significantly reduced. That means no deep frying, no overheating. The best use is simple and direct. Drizzle it over vegetables, salads, or whole grains where it stays in its natural form. There's also a timing and pairing effect that most people completely miss. When consumed with foods rich in fat-soluble nutrients, like leafy greens, absorption improves significantly. One of the most interesting combinations observed in nutritional research is extra virgin olive oil with tomatoes. The natural compounds in tomatoes combined with olive oil create a stronger combined anti inflammatory effect than either food alone. On top of that, freshness matters more than most people realize. The earlier the harvest date, the higher the concentration of active compounds, which is why looking beyond just the expiration date is important if you actually want the full benefit. Now, moving to number four, this is where things become even more interesting because we are stepping into a food that has been part of human healing traditions for thousands of years, long before modern science ever studied it. Number four is wild caught salmon. Think of this not just as food, but as a biological repair tool that works at the level of your cells. In large scale long term studies following older adults, regular consumption of fatty fish like salmon was associated with significantly lower levels of C reactive protein, one of the most important markers of systemic inflammation in the blood. But what really stood out in these studies was not just the blood results, it was the physical function of the participants. Those who regularly ate fish maintained better grip strength, balance, and walking speed over time, which are all major predictors of independence and longevity in aging populations. To understand why this matters, we need to go deeper into what is happening at the cellular level. Every cell in your body is surrounded by a membrane made of fats. These fats determine how flexible and responsive your cells are. When the diet is heavy in processed oils and omega 6 fatty acids, these membranes become less flexible, almost sticky, which increases inflammatory signaling. Over time, this creates a state where the body is constantly reacting as if something is wrong. Wild caught salmon provides omega 3 fatty acids, especially EPA and DHA, which directly replace those inflammatory fats in your cell membranes. This shift literally changes how your cells behave, making them more responsive, more flexible, and significantly less prone to triggering inflammation. And this becomes even more important with age because the body loses efficiency in converting plant-based omega-3 sources into usable forms. That means relying on direct dietary sources like fatty fish becomes far more important after 70 than it is earlier in life. At this point, the science becomes very clear. It is not just about adding a healthy food, it is about replacing harmful patterns in the body at a structural level. And what happens when people make this shift is often not subtle. It is noticeable in energy, mobility, and overall recovery. We're just getting started. And the next food on this list is where things begin to surprise most people because it's something you've likely seen your entire life, maybe even dismissed as too simple to matter. Picking up exactly where we left off, the key point to understand is that inflammation in the body doesn't announce itself loudly in the beginning. It builds slowly, almost silently, until one day it shows up as stiffness in the morning, slower recovery after walking, or that constant sense of fatigue that doesn't seem to have a clear cause. And this is exactly why the foods we're discussing matter so much. They don't just treat symptoms, they target the internal processes that create those symptoms in the first place. Now we move into number three. And this is where things become both surprising and reassuring because the food itself is something most people already enjoy. Number three is blueberries. On the surface, it sounds almost too simple, almost like the kind of advice people dismiss because they've heard it before. But when we look at controlled clinical research, the depth of their effect becomes much clearer. In studies conducted on older adults between the ages of 60 and 78, daily blueberry consumption showed measurable changes in brain and inflammatory markers within just a few weeks. One of the most significant findings was a reduction in NF-kappa B activity, which is essentially one of the body's main switches that turns inflammation-related genes on or off. When this switch is overly active, inflammation stays turned on for longer than it should, contributing to long-term tissue damage and cognitive decline. What makes blueberries particularly important is not just their anti-inflammatory effect, but their impact on brain function. Participants in these studies didn't just show changes in blood markers. They also demonstrated improvements in memory and processing speed. These are not abstract laboratory results. They are real-world changes in how quickly someone can think, recall information, and respond to their environment. For older adults, these are the differences between feeling mentally sharp and feeling mentally slowed down in everyday life. To understand why blueberries have this effect, we need to look inside the cell. Every cell contains mitochondria, which are responsible for producing energy. Think of them as tiny power stations that keep everything running. As we age, these mitochondria begin to lose efficiency. They produce more byproducts known as reactive oxygen species, which act like small sparks inside the cell. When too many of these sparks build up, they trigger inflammation and cellular stress. This is one of the underlying processes behind aging itself. Blueberries contain compounds called anthocyanins, which are responsible for their deep blue color. These compounds have a unique ability to interact with cellular processes that control oxidative stress. Instead of simply masking inflammation, they help neutralize these reactive molecules before they can cause damage. This is a fundamental difference compared to many conventional approaches, which often target symptoms rather than underlying causes. One important detail that many people overlook is that blueberries do not need to be fresh to be effective. In fact, frozen blueberries retain almost the same nutritional value because the key compounds are preserved during freezing. This makes them not only powerful, but also practical and affordable, which is important when we are talking about long term habits rather than short term fixes. Consistency matters more than perfection here. A daily portion is far more impactful than occasional large servings. Another important factor is how blueberries are consumed. When paired with foods like oats, which contain soluble fiber, their absorption and utilization in the body improve significantly. This is because gut bacteria play a role in converting certain compounds into their most active forms. So when blueberries are combined with fiber-rich foods, you are essentially improving how effectively your body can use them. Small adjustments like this can make a measurable difference over time, even though they seem simple on the surface. Now, as we move forwards in this list, things start to become more interesting because we enter a category of food that most people associate with flavor and cooking rather than medicinal value. Number two is where the science becomes even more surprising because it involves something that has been used in traditional medicine for thousands of years, but is still widely misunderstood in modern diets. And the biggest issue isn't whether people consume it, it's how they prepare it, which completely changes its effectiveness. Before we get there, it's important to understand a key shift in thinking. Up to this point, we looked at foods that naturally reduce inflammation through nutrients, antioxidants, and cellular protection. But number two works in a slightly different way. It doesn't just provide anti inflammatory compounds, it actually enhances the body's ability to use its own internal defense systems more efficiently. And that's where things get very interesting, because it turns out preparation is everything. Now we enter a stage where the science becomes even more precise, because we are no longer just talking about adding nutrients to the body, but about activating internal biological systems that already exist inside you. And this is exactly where number two comes in. A food that has been used in traditional healing systems for thousands of years, yet most people today are using it in a way that dramatically reduces its power. Number two is turmeric, but not the way most people are currently consuming it. On its own, turmeric looks simple, almost ordinary, something you might casually add to food without much thought. But inside it lies a compound called curcumin, which is one of the most studied natural anti-inflammatory agents in modern science. In clinical research involving patients with joint inflammation and age-related pain, curcumin has been shown to reduce symptoms at levels comparable to certain anti-inflammatory medications, without producing the same level of side effects on the stomach, kidneys, or cardiovascular system. This alone makes it scientifically significant. However, there is a major problem that changes everything: absorption. When you consume turmeric in its natural form, your body struggles to absorb curcumin effectively. In fact, studies have shown that a very small fraction actually enters the bloodstream when it is consumed alone. This means that most people using turmeric in everyday cooking are not experiencing its full potential, not because the compound is ineffective, but because the body cannot access it properly. This is where the preparation method becomes critical. One of the most important discoveries in nutritional science is that curcumin absorption can increase dramatically when combined with black pepper. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine, which temporarily slows down the breakdown of curcumin in the liver and gut, allowing more of it to enter the bloodstream. This simple combination can increase bioavailability by a massive margin, transforming turmeric from a weak dietary spice into a biologically active compound with measurable effects in the body. Another key factor is fat. Curcumin is fat soluble, meaning it dissolves and travels better in the presence of dietary fats. This is why traditional preparations like golden milk, which combines turmeric with milk or healthy fats, are far more effective than dry powder added to food alone. What ancient cultures discovered through experience, modern research is now confirming at a biochemical level. What makes turmeric particularly interesting for aging populations is its ability to interact with inflammatory pathways in a very targeted way. Instead of suppressing the entire immune response, it appears to influence specific molecular signals involved in chronic inflammation. One of the most studied of these is NF-kappa B, a key regulator that controls inflammatory gene expression. When this pathway is overactive, the body remains in a constant low-grade inflammatory state. Curcumin has been shown in multiple studies to help moderate this activity, supporting a more balanced inflammatory response rather than simply shutting it down. There is also growing research into curcumin's relationship with brain health. One of the most concerning aspects of aging is the gradual buildup of harmful protein clusters in the brain, often associated with cognitive decline. Early research suggests that curcumin may play a role in reducing these accumulations and supporting brain detoxification processes. While research is still ongoing, the results so far are promising enough that it is being studied extensively in neurological research centers. What many people fail to realize is that turmeric is not just about what you take, it is about how you combine it. The difference between an ineffective spice and a powerful biological tool often comes down to small details: black pepper, healthy fat, and consistent intake over time. Without these, most of its potential remains locked away. There is also an important real world aspect to this. Many people who have struggled with long term inflammation, especially in joints and muscles, often report noticeable changes when turmeric is used correctly and consistently. Not overnight, not dramatically in a single moment, but gradually as the body begins to respond to reduced inflammatory load and improved cellular signaling. This is where the real transformation happens, not in quick fixes, but in sustained biological change. Now we arrive at the final and most surprising food in this entire list. This is the one that most people overlook completely, not because it is rare, but because it is often misunderstood or ignored in its early form. And yet, scientifically, it contains one of the most powerful natural compounds known for activating the body's own defense and repair systems at a genetic level. Now we arrive at the final food on this list. And this is where everything you've heard so far starts to connect at a deeper level. Because if inflammation is truly at the center of aging, energy loss, cognitive decline, and physical breakdown, then the most powerful intervention is not just reducing inflammation. It's activating the body's own ability to defend, repair, and regulate itself at a genetic level. And that is exactly what this final food does. Number one is broccoli sprouts. Not mature broccoli, not florets, not stems, but the young sprouts that most people overlook or have never even seen before. At first glance, they don't look like anything special. Small, green shoots, often sold in tiny containers or grown at home. But inside them is one of the most powerful naturally occurring compounds ever studied in nutritional science: sulforaphane. What makes broccoli sprouts so unique is not just that they contain sulforaphane, but that they contain it in dramatically higher concentrations than mature broccoli. Research from major institutions, including studies conducted at leading university medical centers, has shown that broccoli sprouts can contain dozens of times more of this compound compared to fully grown broccoli. This difference is not minor. It completely changes their biological impact. Sulforaphane works differently from the other foods on this list. instead of simply reducing inflammation directly, it activates a master regulatory system inside your body known as NRF2. Think of NRF2 as a control center that turns on hundreds of protective genes at once. When activated, it increases the production of enzymes responsible for detoxification, antioxidant defense, and inflammation control. In simple terms, it helps your body switch itself into a stronger, more protective state from within. This is important because many age related conditions are not caused by a single issue, but by a gradual decline in multiple protective systems at the same time. As we age, our ability to neutralize oxidative stress, repair cellular damage, and regulate inflammation becomes less efficient. Sulforaphane helps reactivate some of these systems, essentially supporting the body's natural defense network rather than replacing it. One of the key findings in research on broccoli sprouts is their impact on oxidative stress markers, which are chemical indicators of cellular damage. In controlled studies, regular consumption has been associated with significant reductions in these markers, along with improvements in inflammatory indicators linked to cardiovascular health, brain function, and overall aging. These are not small or isolated changes. They reflect system wide improvements in how the body handles stress at a cellular level. However, there is a critical detail that determines whether broccoli sprouts actually work or not, and most people are completely unaware of it. Sulforaphane is not stored directly in the plant in its active form. Instead, it is created when two compounds inside the sprout interact, and this reaction only happens properly when the sprouts are raw and properly prepared. Heat destroys the enzyme needed for this conversion, which means cooking them can significantly reduce their effectiveness. This is why preparation matters so much. Eating them raw preserves the natural enzymatic activity that allows sulforaphane to form inside your body during digestion. This is also why many experts recommend adding them fresh to salads, sandwiches, or smoothies rather than cooking them into meals. It is a small detail, but it completely changes the outcome. There is also a synergy effect that makes broccoli sprouts even more powerful. When combined with certain nutrients like selenium, found in foods such as Brazil nuts, the body's ability to use the protective enzymes activated by sulforaphane becomes even more efficient. This means that the benefits are not isolated. They are amplified when combined correctly with other foods in your diet. What makes this final food so important is not just its strength, but its mechanism. Unlike many dietary approaches that target one symptom at a time, broccoli sprouts influence the body at a regulatory level, affecting multiple systems simultaneously. This is why researchers are so interested in its long-term potential, especially in the context of aging and chronic disease prevention. At this point, it becomes clear that inflammation is not simply something to suppress, it is something to regulate intelligently, and the body already has the tools to do this. The role of food in this context is not to force change, but to support those built-in systems so they function as they were designed to. So when you look at everything together, olive oil, salmon, blueberries, turmeric, and broccoli sprouts, you start to see a pattern. Each one works differently, but all of them point toward the same outcome: lowering chronic inflammation, improving cellular resilience, and supporting healthier aging from the inside out. And that brings us to the final reflection. Because none of this works if it remains information alone. The real change begins when it moves from knowledge into habit. Even choosing one of these foods and consistently including it in your routine can start to shift how your body responds over time. Not instantly, not dramatically overnight, but steadily in a way that builds on itself. Now, as we close this out, I want to leave you with a simple thought. Aging is not just something that happens to you. It's something that responds to what you repeatedly do every day. And when you understand that, you realize you have far more influence over your health than most people ever believe. If this made you think differently about food and inflammation, the next step is simple. Start with one change, one food, one habit, and let your body respond from there.